My name is Abigail, and I am 25 years old. Yesterday marked a significant milestone in my life. I married my partner of 4 years in an intimate backyard ceremony, perfectly timed to coincide with our fourth anniversary. Though the wedding was small, its importance made postponement unthinkable. Every detail, from decorations to catering, had been carefully arranged, underscoring how impractical it would have been to reschedule. Yet, the day was bittersweet. My father, who was meant to walk me down the aisle, was absent. Initially, he claimed a medical emergency, but under pressure, he confessed the truth. He had chosen to attend a rare camping trip with my brother, who only visits a few weeks each year. His decision felt like a prioritization of my brother over me, and his dismissive suggestion that rescheduling would be easy only deepened my hurt. In his absence, my stepdad walked me down the aisle. It was a touching moment, but it carried a weight of emotion that shouldn't have been there. When my father arrived after the ceremony, he was visibly moved by the photos, realizing the magnitude of what he had missed. We had a raw, emotional conversation that culminated in his tearful request for a second ceremony as a way to make amends. The situation left me conflicted. While I was deeply hurt by his initial decision, I was also pained by the regret and guilt he felt afterward. The day, which should have been filled solely with joy, became a reflection of the complicated dynamics within my family, underscoring how seemingly simple choices can have profound consequences. Growing up, my relationship with my family was always complex, particularly with my older brother. Despite my efforts to feel genuinely happy for him, his arrogance often overshadowed my admiration. Gifted in many areas, he had a way of positioning himself as the center of attention, which only amplified his brash demeanor. He didn't hesitate to tease or bully me, making our relationship tense. When he left for college, I felt an undeniable sense of relief. This dynamic was further strained when my parents divorced during my middle school years. Their marriage had been fraught with tension for as long as I could remember, and while they put on a united front in public, their unhappiness at home was palpable. Their split was triggered by my mother's affair with a college friend, which led to a bitter and contentious divorce. Despite the circumstances, my father agreed to shared custody. The aftermath of the divorce was challenging. My father began drinking more heavily, and his relationship with me grew increasingly distant, especially after I chose to maintain a friendly relationship with my mother and her new husband. My brother, on the other hand, sided completely with my father, often vocalizing his disdain for my mother and stepdad. This created a deep rift between us, as I sought to navigate a middle ground. A few months after the divorce, my mother remarried. I stood as a bridesmaid at her wedding, but my brother refused to attend. Despite his resentment, he was still required to spend half of each month with our mother as part of the custody agreement, a situation he bitterly opposed. Unlike my father, my mother treated us equally, which my brother struggled to accept. For someone so accustomed to being the center of attention, the perceived loss of favoritism was difficult for him to process, leading to frequent outbursts. My father, believing my brother was being mistreated by my mother and stepfather, made several attempts to gain full custody. However, his claims lacked evidence and were ultimately unsuccessful. Over time, these battles only served to deepen the divisions within our family. Reflecting on my wedding day, I can't help but see how my father's absence and the reasons behind it are emblematic of the larger dynamics that have shaped our family. While I strive to move forward with grace, this event has left me grappling with the weight of old wounds, the complexity of familial love, and the ever-present challenge of finding balance in relationships marked by conflict and history. I felt a sense of relief knowing my mother truly cared for me, and that my stepfather was a kind and decent man. As a child, I struggled with conflicting emotions about my mother's affair, which ended her marriage to my father. Over time, I chose to focus on my happiness and maintained a close relationship with her, a decision I would cherish even more after losing her to cancer 4 years ago. The time we spent together became precious memories, and I came to appreciate her unwavering love despite the complexities of her personal life. In her final days, my brother visited rarely, but he made an effort to be there toward the end, bringing her some comfort. After her passing, my stepfather moved out of state, though we stayed in touch. A year later, my brother relocated to London for a job, visiting our father annually, and our communication dwindled to nearly nothing. As the years passed, the dynamics in my family began to shift, particularly between my father and me. He apologized for his distant behavior after the divorce, admitting that he had felt betrayed and hurt. He also confessed to favoring my brother, which strained our relationship. We agreed to work on improving our bond, and to my surprise, it began to heal. The change was so profound that I asked him to walk me down the aisle at my wedding, and he agreed. Despite this progress, I always felt like a secondary concern to my father, especially when my brother was around. My father's efforts to connect with me only seemed to happen in my brother's absence, a pattern that became glaringly obvious with a recent incident. He asked me to postpone my wedding so he could go on a last-minute camping trip with my brother. Hurt and frustrated, I called my stepdad and asked him to walk me down the aisle instead. My stepdad, who had been a supportive presence during my mother's funeral, hesitated at first, aware of the tension this could cause with my father. Eventually, he agreed. As my wedding day approached, my father became increasingly distant, preoccupied with my brother's visit. On the big day, he was absent, a painful yet unsurprising reality. I held out hope he might arrive at the last minute, but that hope faded as I walked down the aisle with my stepdad by my side, a moment that was both joyful and bittersweet. Later, I sent my father a photo from the ceremony showing my stepdad escorting me. Hours passed without a response, but as the evening wound down, he unexpectedly appeared, exhausted and apologetic. He admitted he regretted not prioritizing my wedding and suggested holding a second ceremony so he could walk me down the aisle. His plea left me torn between hope for a new beginning and frustration over his thoughtlessness. As we spoke, it became clear his regret wasn't entirely about missing my wedding. It was also about being outshone by my stepdad. His desire for a second ceremony seemed driven more by pride than genuine care for me. Disappointed, I told him I wouldn't rearrange my special day for his benefit. His tears and apologies followed, but they couldn't erase the years of neglect and the hurt he caused with his choices. I stood firm, recounting the many times he had let me down, and explained why I couldn't overlook this latest betrayal. Despite his emotional display, I couldn't ignore the pattern of his behavior. My stepdad's presence at my wedding had been one of love and support, while my father's was a history of performative affection and empty promises. Eventually, I left him outside, retreating to the peace of my home. He and my brother departed shortly after. In the time since that day, I've reflected on what happened. While part of me feels regret for the harsh words and the pain they caused, I find comfort in knowing I stood up for myself. My decision to have my stepdad walk me down the aisle wasn't just a reaction to my father's absence. It was a recognition of who had genuinely been there for me throughout my life. I've made countless excuses for my father's actions, but I've reached my limit. His behavior is inexcusable, and I no longer feel obligated to forgive him. It's painful to confront the truth about someone you love, but everyone has their breaking point. For years, I endured his neglect silently, hiding the tears he caused. Now, I'm finally prioritizing my own well-being, even if it means leaving him behind. I've made the difficult but necessary decision to cut off contact with my father for now, a choice I feel justified in making. My husband supports me fully, Though he made it clear he wanted this decision to be entirely my own, I also shared my concerns with my stepdad, worried that I'd unintentionally used him as a pawn in my issues with my father. He reassured me, acknowledging the strength of our relationship, which brought me comfort. To anyone concerned about my stepdad's feelings, he has expressed no resentment, which eases my mind. In the days since my wedding, my father has reached out repeatedly, but I've chosen not to respond. I haven't read his messages, preferring to focus on the upcoming honeymoon and this new chapter of my life. When he called again this morning, I considered checking his messages, but decided against it. I didn't want his words to disrupt the peace I'm trying to build as I embark on this special journey with my husband. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I reviewed the messages. They were heartfelt and apologetic, each conveying his regret for failing as a father. He admitted he had favored my brother over the years, and acknowledged the validity of my grievances. He expressed a desperate desire to mend our relationship, calling me his only remaining biological child and pleading for forgiveness. While his words stirred up complex emotions, I had already decided that I needed distance to heal. I called him back to make my position clear. He answered immediately, beginning to apologize, but I interrupted. I explained that his constant calls and messages were not helping. They only reopened wounds I was trying to close. I told him I was about to leave for my honeymoon and needed space. I promised to reach out when I was ready to reconnect, but until then, I asked him to respect my boundaries and refrain from contacting me. He agreed, hiding any hurt in his voice, and the conversation ended on a quiet yet definitive note. By the third day of my honeymoon, I was finally starting to feel at ease, but my peace was disrupted by an unexpected call from my brother, who used a burner phone to reach me. Initially, I wanted to hang up as soon as I heard his voice, but his accusations of me being an escapist kept me on the line. He criticized my treatment of our father, demanded I apologize, and lectured me on the importance of family. He argued that our father would always be part of my life, and that my stepdad could never replace him. His words felt juvenile, as though we were still children caught in the fallout of our parents' divorce. When I explained this was a matter between me and our father, he insisted it affected the entire family. He claimed I'd ruined his visit and cut short their camping trip, accusing me of acting out of jealousy. I told him his accusations were baseless and immature, pointing out that despite his professional success, he seemed stuck in our childhood dynamics. Before he could respond, I ended the call, feeling both a sense of relief and frustration. After returning from my honeymoon, I decided it was time to confront the lingering issues with my father. I visited him, surprising him, and my brother, who was also present. Ignoring my brother's habitual interference, I requested a private conversation with my father, and after some reluctance, he agreed. I expressed my disappointment in his recent behavior, particularly his request to reschedule my wedding for a camping trip. I reminded him of the progress we'd made in our relationship over the years, and how his actions had undermined that progress. I also questioned whether his absence stemmed from genuine priorities or a sense of competition with my stepdad. The conversation was difficult, but necessary. My father expressed deep regret for missing my wedding, and I reassured him that dwelling on the past wouldn't help either of us. I told him I wasn't ready to sever ties permanently. Losing my mother to cancer taught me how fleeting life can be, and despite my father's faults, I still cherish the good memories we've shared. However, I also emphasized that I needed time to heal. I explained that rebuilding our relationship would take time, possibly weeks, months, or even years, and I needed him to respect my space in the meantime. He agreed, asking if he could hug me before I left. We shared a brief, emotional embrace, and I managed to hold back tears until I was alone in my car. This isn't an ending, but rather a pause, a chance for both of us to reflect, heal, and decide how to move forward.